Hey, welcome back. I haven't really shown my face in quite some time. The beard has been growing quite a bit, but that's not really the point of this video. In today's video, I wanted to discuss a specific question that happens a lot, that might be asked of me, or at least hinted at, suggested at. And the question is the same as the title of the video. Did I attract this negative event into my life? Was it my fault? Now, this is a very important question, because if we study consciousness, there is a tendency for some people to perhaps make a slight error in the way that we're trying to teach people that they can attract whatever they want into their lives. Because when we're considering negative events, it is a fair question to ask ourselves, well, did I attract this, or did the victim of a negative event attract that into their worlds? Now, I think that's a very bad angle to approach it from, because what happens is that we're in the position we walk the risk of blaming a victim in certain circumstances, which is not what these teachings are about at all. What we want to understand is that our individual results, we can control them by using our minds in a certain way. So by holding ideas and certain visions of what we want and where we want to go with our lives, we can attract the way in order to achieve such a result, to change our lives in that direction. But of course, other people out there, in my world, in your world, everybody's world, they might have very negative ideas. So we're not in control of other people's minds at all. It's not even our business to control somebody else's mind. So what happens is that there's, of course, people out there that might have a highly destructive and negative concept about the world and about other people, and then they might lash out and do negative things to other people as well. And therefore, some of us, throughout our lifetimes, might become victim of certain drastic negative activities that happen in our worlds. So again, I want people to understand that I personally don't agree with the notion that because something horrible happened to somebody, it's their own fault because they attracted that into their lives. That makes no sense, because after all, we have to again keep in mind the fact that everybody has the free will, the freedom to think whatever they want to think, and sadly most people do work with a very pessimistic point of view in life, and therefore are acting in very pessimistic ways that are not really to the benefit of anyone out there, and so it leads them into actions that might hurt others. Now, I'm aware there are people out there who think these teachings about the mind would suggest that it's our own fault when bad things happen to us. Now, personally, again, I don't agree with that, and I also don't teach people that when I would work with them in private. Let me try and give you a better idea of how we could create a wonderful life for ourselves in spite of negative events from the past. So in the case of the so-called law of attraction, which is pretty much, I have already talked about it, but my idea about that so-called law is simply that what you hold in your mind, you attract, you start to magnify. So any idea or purpose we hold into our minds start to expand, start to become more powerful, so we start to act differently and create different sorts of results for ourselves, therefore manifesting a so-called invisible state of the consciousness. So that is how we want to look at it. If something horrible happened to you, then you shouldn't feel like it's your fault, because it's not your fault. The only time when it would be your fault is, for example, if we deliberately ourselves start acting in a negative way, therefore creating negative results, perhaps getting into conflicts with other people because of that behavior that we're involved in. Well, then you could say, well, it's your own fault. You should change your behavior a bit there and start acting more appropriate, or at least more optimistic, so you can see that your life can improve in a good way. But if people did something absolutely horrible to you or to somebody you know, then I don't think it's a good thing to say to such people that you attracted this, it's your own fault. And this is something that happens a lot of the times. This is one of the issues that people have with these teachings about consciousness, is that they come across certain individuals that study the mind and then also approach everything from that angle. They literally start saying, well, it's probably your own fault that you got abused, you got into a situation of domestic abuse, or perhaps rape, sexual abuse, all that stuff that can happen to people. It's absolutely insane to just say, well, it's somebody's own fault because of how they were using their mind. That makes no sense, because you can't control, again, anybody else's minds. The only thing we can control in life is us, ourselves. We can only control our own consciousness, and it is up to us to control it. So what I suggest people do in such situations, if something horrible happened to you of that nature, is again to first of all not feel that it is your fault, because it's not your fault. You're not responsible for how somebody else has behaved towards you or what they did to you. But what you're responsible for is how you're using your own mind. So even though something negative can happen in our worlds, we never should forget that we have the power to create something absolutely brilliant, absolutely beautiful for ourselves as well. And that is the tricky part. If we get stuck in the negative events from the past, we're unable to see these opportunities that could come to us if we change our minds, if we change our outlook on what the future might still hold for us. And so many people are stuck in a negative pattern from the past, so they can't really see any opportunities, and therefore they stay sort of stuck in the negativity. So no matter what happened to you, the goal, the trick here, the important part for you to remember and to remind people of is that they have a mind, and if they learn how to use their mind in a certain way, they can improve their lives even though something absolutely tragic might have happened to them in the past. So they shouldn't beat up on themselves either for what somebody else did to you. And that is the truth. And I think that's the best way to go about this, to approach it from this angle. And anybody out there that is studying consciousness but then has the sort of audacity to say to these victims of abuse and some absolutely atrocious things, to say that it's their fault, that makes no sense, man. I do not agree with that personally, as a writer and YouTuber that talks about the power of consciousness in his own way. So that's something I wanted to remind you that, again, the question of the title of this video is, did I attract this negative event into my life? Was it my fault? Well, the answer to that is no. Sometimes we don't understand truly why something happens to us. It's sometimes not easy to grasp why something negative happens to people out there in the world, something absolutely tragic. Somebody loses their life totally at random. They were living a wonderful life and somebody comes along and takes their life. Did these people attract that? Again, I wouldn't say they did attract it. I would simply say what we actually need to understand and keep in mind is, again, the fact that we're living in a world where everybody has their own individual expression to which their consciousness is operating, is expressing itself throughout life. And sadly, and it is a reality, that we are also surrounded by people who might simply be just so negative that therefore we might come across them. But again, it's also not something you should fear about, because that would lead into that issue that people don't dare to go outside of their homes or to travel anywhere any longer because they're afraid of something bad happening to them. You also don't want to do that either. We have to grasp that the good and bad are part of life. They're part of each other's, well, they're like polarity to each other. Like, if you have a good thing in your life, the bad stuff that might happen at times is there to sort of balance the scales. I know it sounds kind of weird, because if it's like the typical idea that if everything was positive non-stop every day, you would become unable to recognize it for being good, because, without the bad, you don't recognize the good, and without the good, you can't recognize the bad. These are spiritual polarities of life. So therefore, also, we want to keep in mind that we obviously don't want bad things to happen to us or to other people, but when they do happen, we want to understand that even though it might be absolutely horrible what has happened, we still have the power within ourselves to create a wonderful world together, and if not together with other people, we can at least work on it individually for ourselves. And as long as we keep that in mind, no matter what happens to you then physically over here on planet Earth, you always have the power to make something great out of your life. You'll become like a powerful individual expression of life, because you've learned how to use your mind in the right way. And the previous videos and lectures on my channel are there to help people support in building a better perception of their own potential, of the power of their own consciousness. So they're meant for you to study them and think about them in your own time and apply them towards whatever goal you still have for yourself, whatever thing that you want to outgrow that is currently holding you back, so you finally can have a bright, beautiful future for yourself. Anyways, with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.